communities, helping clients to build multi-generational wealth through real estate.
So there are so much inner conflict also happening all at the same time. Everything is new, and your beliefs, your values is literally broken. And that in itself will take quite a number of years to deal with it. How would you help with people who are literally going through the whole inner conflict of questioning their values and beliefs about marriage that they built over the years?
Yeah. Well, Mitra, that's such a great question and such a deep question, and it could take hours to really get into the nitty-gritty of it. But for me, it's really about inner activism. It's really going deep inside of yourself to find who you really are as a person and what your real conflict is inside of you. And very often, the real conflict that's inside of you comes from your childhood, comes from maybe a culture that you were raised in. It comes from maybe institutions that you were brought up with, where you were programmed to be a certain way. And so very often we have to go deep within to say, what is the conflict? How was I programmed to believe who I am? And during a marriage, we have all these different labels that are put on us. I'm a mom, I'm an employee, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a business owner, I'm all of these labels, and we forget who we really, really are. And so we have to do this inner activism. But the thing is, if you can't resolve the inner conflict inside of you, it's going to mirror the outer conflict outside of you. So when you can change from the inside and you can say, yeah, maybe I also contributed to this. It's not 100% their fault. When we can start acknowledging and when we can start admitting that we all were also to blame for where we are, even if it's just 2% at fault, when we can start doing this and dealing with that inner conflict, the outside conflict starts reducing. It's not so painful. It's not so huge, because you start seeing things with a different perspective. You start growing, and there's a growth inside of you that happens. And when you respond differently to the world responds differently to you, without a doubt, guaranteed. But it really is, very often people will say, I don't know why the marriage ended. I gave everything. I was selfless. I was whatever. But happy people don't end a marriage. Happy people, happy couples, don't go look outside for love or attention. So you have to think back and go, what was happening in our marriage that maybe that person went out and had an affair, or that person did something? And I'm not talking about violence, because that's a whole another issue altogether. But, sometimes we have to look and say, what did I contribute to this? And very often the person who decides to leave the marriage or does something wrong in the marriage, they get the blame for it. You decided to leave, you had the affair, you did all of this. But what was my contribution? Was I ignoring them? Was I not meeting their emotional needs? When we can just realize, yes, I did have a part to play, you can own that. That other person can then also accept and understand that both of you had a part to play. But when one person is constantly being told, you're the villain, you're the bad one, I'm the victim, you're never going to get to resolution. And there's this thing called a drama triangle, where we have the persecutor, we've got a victim, and we've got a hero. Okay, very often the lawyer or your friend even is the hero, and they're trying to swoop in and to make things better. But our roles are constantly changing, because you as a persecutor might be feeling you're the victim as well. No one actually understands how difficult this was. No one understands the pain that I'm in. They just think that I'm the bad one all the time. And the victim doesn't understand that they're possibly persecuting as well. So we have to see the roles that we play and how we're constantly shifting and changing. But that means you first have to understand the conflict that's happening inside of you.
So with the inner activism, dealing with the inner conflicts that we constantly have, there is a huge healing process that could take years, going through the whole this self-discovery and self-healing. How do you help people going through this?
So it's really, first of all, about contemplation. And it's really seeing your habits, and habits being how you think. What is your go-to thought about yourself? What is your go-to thought about somebody else? Like, what are your judgments? What are your biases? What are your triggers? So when you can start seeing what's happening inside, that's what I mean by inner activism. It's working hard on yourself to see, oh, wow, I know that when this bumps me, I get reactive. So it's really starting to understand your triggers, understanding your biases, understanding your emotions, and befriending your emotions. Emotions and anger is actually a very beautiful emotion. Anger itself is very, very healthy. It's our reaction to anger. It's when we feel angry and we don't harness it and catch it, that we start doing, we have a consequence, an action that we do. That's when anger is dangerous. But anger in itself is a very protective emotion. It's saying something has happened that I need to protect you. But when we see that and going, whoa, why do I suddenly feel that I have to protect myself? Oh, it's because that programming of X, Y, and Z, we're then able to say to anger, thank you for showing me how I'm feeling. Now I've got a choice. And now I'm going to respond appropriately. And I'm not going to react, because my reaction, hurt people hurt. My reaction is just going to be an arrow in my spouse or my ex-spouse, and they're just going to attack me back. So it's really important in activism is noticing our triggers, noticing how our body is feeling, noticing where our thoughts are, noticing what's happening inside of us all the time. Because our body is giving us indications all the time, but we're on autopilot. We're not listening to our body. It's got that red light flashing all the time. If your car has got the red light comes on, oil change, you go to the mechanic and you deal with it. Our body's got the red light on all the time, and we just go, I should be fine for another 10 kilometers, okay? Or I'm not going to worry about it, or I'm just going to ignore it because I don't have the money to deal with it. Or our body is telling us all the time, and we're ignoring it.
So it seems that in many ways, the way I look at it is the issue of courage, or the lack of courage for many of us, or for most of us perhaps, that instead of dealing with issues that are arising that seemingly small, we wait for this to be unbearable, then we grow resentful inside, and then we need to hire external help to actually try and address the problem that's been there for possibly years. Also, a lot of people are thinking of themselves as moderately good or very good. And instead, the reality is most of us are actually moderately bad, but we pose as moderately good. And people are not bad because they don't feel the emotions inside that would allow them to behave in ways that society would think as bad, but because they're just afraid of showing those emotions. Mm-hmm. So it's lack of courage or cowardice that makes people quote unquote good, pretend good, and then issues start arising like the ones that you are dealing with or have been dealing with every day in your professional career. That it's too late to fix anything. Now we have this huge bubble that we need to somehow address, and then we need external help, lawyers, court system, legal system in general, to try and put everything right again or make our lives whole, whatever the case may be. So it seems like a big part of what you do is actually encouraging people, what I've gathered, to communicate better with one another, even after that fateful event had happened, that, they no longer want to live with one another, or they no longer enjoy the company of one another. And second thing is actually, so communication is one, and how to communicate is something that you coach them as well. And the second thing is actually, you seem to be encouraging them to be more courageous in expressing their emotions, paying attention to what they feel inside, and actually expressing that in the moment. Is that what I'm gathering as well?
Absolutely.
Is this correct?
It's 100% correct. And, being vulnerable is possibly the most courageous thing you can be. Because if I'm vulnerable with you, should I rather say, if you're vulnerable with me, I'm going to have empathy and compassion for you. Because there's something that you've said resonates inside of me. And so I'll resonate with you. And then I'll have empathy, and then I'll have compassion. So empathy is, I understand you. I feel what you're feeling. Compassion is, and how can I help you? Okay. So very often, one of the words Mitra, you used and Vlad, you used as well, is shame. And so very often, clients don't even tell their lawyers all the truth because they're ashamed. They don't want to say to the lawyer, I had an affair, I've had 4 affairs, whatever it is, because they're scared that they're going to be judged. Okay, so they don't always share, or, very often the amount of times people will come and they'll say, I'm bringing my cousin with, and the cousin comes with, and I know it's not the cousin. I know it's their new partner. They just haven't told their spouse that they're separating. We know things, lawyers. We it's not our first rodeo when we see clients, but people feel ashamed. And if you are not going to be open and honest with your lawyer or with the separation process, how can you expect the other person to trust you and to be open and honest with you as well? So, but it's that shame. And so very often what I've noticed in my career as a lawyer, in my experience, is only 2 things that people want at the end of the marriage. They either want to be acknowledged or they want an apology. So they either want the partner to say, I actually acknowledge that you were a great husband. You were a great father. We maybe didn't work well together, but you were a great provider. Just to acknowledge that, yes, you actually see me as a person. Acknowledgement is huge. Or an apology to say, I'm really sorry that I put you through this pain. It wasn't a choice. I didn't do it because I wanted to hurt you, and I'm so sorry that this is happening. Now, people are scared of those 2 things. They're scared to acknowledge because they think if I acknowledge, then I'm going to get punished, and don't ever apologize for anything. But it's not about society. If you're separating from a person who knows you intimately, then those 2 things are very, very important. You're asking them to trust you. You have to be vulnerable. And that takes courage. And communication is key in any relationship. In any relationship. But very often what happens is we forget to communicate. We stop talking to each other. We talk to our friends instead, or we just on our phones, or we forget how to communicate with each other. And then we go through separation and suddenly we have to communicate, but we've forgotten how to communicate with each other. So for me, it's very important that we get this communication going, because particularly if you have children and you're co-parenting, you're going to have to communicate with each other. You don't have to be the best of friends. You can still harbor maybe a little bit of frustration or whatever it is. But for your kids, you have to learn how to communicate. And that's courageous.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicolle.
Purple Tree Group, connecting people, building communities, helping clients to build multi-generational wealth through real estate.